Exhausted, frustrated, discouraged, depleted. These are common feelings I've heard from people who've been in difficult dialogues or conversations and conflict. Today, I'm going to offer you 5 steps you can take to build your resilience, bounce back, and be even more adept at these very hard conversations. I'm Bob Bordone. I'm a senior fellow at Harvard Law School. I'm the founder and former director of Harvard Law School's Negotiation and Mediation clinical program. I taught negotiation, conflict resolution, mediation, and many other courses at Harvard Law School for more than 2 decades, and I'm a founder and principal of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. So, if you've recently had a depleting and really hard conversation, I'd love to hear about that in the comments below. Or, if you're thinking about having such a conversation but you're avoiding, I'd love to hear about that as well. So let me start with the first and really important tip, which is that if you just had a really hard, really exhausting, terribly traumatizing, or maybe just depleting conversation, congratulate yourself. You just did something very hard and very brave.
You did it.
And you should give yourself some credit for that. That's not easy to do. Lots of people avoid it. You know, one of the opportunities and real gifts that I've had through the years has been to occasionally accompany someone who is struggling and coming out to a parent or a loved one. And I can remember some years ago teaching at Harvard Law School, having a student come into my office, and this student literally was physically shaking and basically said, I am 28 years old. I've never kissed anybody, and I think I'm gay. Oh, and by the way, I come from a very conservative Christian family. And over quite a long period of time, he and I had conversations where ultimately he actually decided to come out to his mom. To be honest, it didn't go that great. She didn't buy some rainbow banner for him. She wasn't at the Pride Parade the next year. But for him, just reminding him, you did something that many people would never have the courage to do. And in many respects, in this way, it was a real gift of authenticity to your family member. That itself was encouraging. The second piece of advice I have for you is just to feel the feels. Like, let yourself feel the full range of emotion, which may be exhaustion, sadness, fury, anger, maybe vulnerability. You know, I'm a big Brené Brown fan, and one of the things Brené Brown says is that you cannot experience joy and peace without also letting yourself feel all the uncomfortable, hard feelings as well. In other words, as Brené says, you can't selectively numb certain feelings. And so there is a real value in terms of building resiliency to not push away, but to embrace the hard feelings, knowing that that's going to help you embrace the good feelings, the joyful feelings, the pleasure, the peace when that comes. Third piece of advice is, now that you've completed that really hard conversation, however it went, consider doing some self-reflection. And the self-reflection that I think is really powerful is doing some journaling. So what would you be journaling about? Write about what was hard for you. Write about the things that you did that you think worked, that you would want to do again. Write about the things you said or did that, frankly, you might do a little bit differently. Write about what did you learn. That process actually builds your conflict threshold and makes you stronger for navigating that next difficult conversation. It's really interesting as I think about that student who sat in my office at the age of 28 and who worked really hard to have the difficult conversation with his mom. You know what? That wasn't the last conversation, because he also had a sister, and he thought, this will go down worse with my sister. And you know what? He had a father that he thought it would be an unmitigated disaster. In fact, when we first talked, he said, I will never tell my father. The work of the journaling, the work of identifying what are some of the things that I actually thought worked with my mom, and what are some things I would do differently, and what was hard about this, that actually empowered him to later on have the conversation with his sister, and ultimately to have the conversation with his dad. You know what's really amazing? 6 years after that student walked into my office, I went to his wedding in San Francisco, and his mom was there, and his sister was there, and his dad was there. And dad gave a pretty rocking toast. So let's move on to step number 4, which is actually what my student did, and that's consider speaking with either a friend or a colleague or a trusted family member, or in this case, it was a mentor. But talking it through afterwards can be really helpful. Sometimes it might be a therapist, it doesn't need to be a therapist, but giving yourself that space to process. And I want to give you a little bit of advice with respect to that, because if the way you're processing it is all of the ways in which the other person was terrible, you probably won't actually learn that much. You won't build that conflict resiliency. But if you talk about your experience and what was hard, and also do some venting, I think, again, it gives you some of that courage to go into the next really hard conflict. One of the things that I have learned through the work that I do is that the thought of what the conflict experience will be is almost always worse than what the actual conversation is like. And the more you can encode that and remind yourself of that through reflection and through conversation, the better it is for the next time you have to enter the fray. And this really leads to my last piece of advice, which is considering whether and how to approach the conversation again next time. So let me break that into 2 pieces. The first piece might be that you had some really hard negotiation or a really hard conversation with somebody, but you're not done yet. And you need to think about, do I want to do that again? The second piece, of course, is a little bit like the example I used, which is that you've had the conversation with person A, but now you still got to talk to person B. In both cases, there is this question of, am I going to do this again? And I think the kinds of questions you want to ask yourself are, first, is the relationship really important to you? Second, have you given yourself some time and space to kind of feel the feels, do some reflection, and do a reset? And lastly, are there sufficient supports in place if the conversation doesn't go well? So to further build your conflict resilience skills, watch this next video, Influence Mastery, the Art of Relationship Building. And before you go, do me a favor, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and ring the bell so you continue to build those important skills of conflict resilience, hard dialogue, and negotiation. Okay, it's not difficult to keep watching. Click, click.